Hello, all right, welcome to what will probably be our last major slideshow presentation for the course here. Now that we've finished up invention and we can move on to our second canon, arrangement. There are certainly still some things to talk about with style and the thesis itself and some of these final homework tasks for this semester and getting into next semester, but this is really the last major slideshow of learning content. So that's exciting for a lot of reasons here. So let's get into Canon 2 arrangement with what we like to call the Sophistic Topics here. The Sophistic Topics, are, again, they sound similar to those special topics that we talked about a little bit, the common topics from invention. The special topics are those particular things that you know and that you learn from your particular field of inquiry, whatever it is that you are specializing in. So, special topics, that's sort of where we get this idea of, specialization and, getting a major in college or, a degree, and then, whatever field that you're working in, more about that topic than other people who are not in that field, who haven't studied and trained and learned in that, spent time working in that field. So those are special topics that you will probably learn about for your thesis, and then you'll have to find some way to communicate those to an audience that may not be as knowledgeable as you are about that field. Certainly for this task, as you start to become more specialized in college and whatever work field that you're in, as you continue to study and hone your skills and your learning, you'll be able to engage in those exciting conversations with other specialists and people in your field for those special topics will become sort of common language for you and your coworkers there, which is always exciting to do, as you get older and more experienced in your whatever field you're in. The common topics, as we said, are the ways that you speak about any sort of issue to anybody. Does it exist? And what kind of thing is it? Good or bad? The morality of it, the honorability of it, things like that. What should you do about this issue? Those are the common topics that anybody can, without a whole lot of specialized learning, can talk about any sort of thing in whatever particular field, right? And so related to those topics are what we call the sophistic topics. For you as a inventor of ideas, how you start to put them in a proper order and shape. The sophistic topics are, patterns of ideas, so they fall there, even though they're similar to invention, the things that you make up, the things that you say and that you use to persuade your audience and prove your points. They're also, again, patterns of how you talk about them, and so they'll fall, pretty well here in arrangement. Okay, so as you can see from this slide, there are two major kinds of relationships that are, organized here. Whole-part relations, which we've done a little bit already, especially in English class over the years, and general, specific, or genus-species relations, which they're fairly similar, but they're not quite the same. They take a little bit of getting used to, but then you can look at this slide, these slides again a couple times if it takes more than one look at them to figure them out. But whole part relations, we start here. We've used this, like I said, a lot over the years in English class. When you're analyzing and organizing in terms of whole part relationships, you first figure out, okay, what is the whole? What is the total entity of this idea, this problem, this issue? What are the parts that make it up? What are the subcomponents? How do those parts relate to each other? And then how do the parts relate to the whole? And that is, in English class over the years, we've been calling that analysis. That is effectively what you are doing. When you analyze something, this is exactly the procedure that you go through. This is what analysis effectively is. An exploration of whole part relationships. What is the whole thing? Whatever the book is, for example. What are the parts? The plot, the characters, the themes, the ideas, the conflicts, setting. How do those parts relate to each other? How do these characters relate to the theme of this book or movie or something like that? And then how do those things put together make up this whole? And then you understand, synthesize it into a new whole, new understanding. Okay? So that is whole part relationships, something we've been doing for quite some time, and something that you'll continue to do throughout this thesis process. The other more common, series of relationships, as you said, is general or specific or genus species, which certainly draws upon inductive and deductive reasoning, if you remember those ideas from the past and from our invention unit and the logic, things like that. Similar to that is, this is one major way of defining terms and organizing your ideas around how you define these ideas. And the genus, as you know from science class, basically, is this class of what you're investigating, what you're talking about. And the species are those particulars, the members of that group or members of that class, right? And you use this relationship effectively when you are trying to get people to think in terms of analogies, similar sorts of ideas, drawing upon examples. Here are some members of this class that you may be familiar with to your audience, and then here's this new thing or a similar thing that you're bringing up to their attention. And you can effectively create a class, create some sort of genus for investigation, and then you look at the particular examples, and then you explain them effectively. And as you create genus-species relationships within your enterprise, within your speech or your paper, that becomes an effective look at relationships that way. Two of the most common ways that we've been doing this, you've been, again, just like with whole-part relationships and analysis, you've been doing general genus and species relationships for quite some time too. As you can see here from the slide, that comparing and contrasting are basically another exploration of genus-species relationships, and the same thing with cause and effect. These are two ways you've been doing these sophistic topics of these relationships for years. And so hopefully that is sort of good news that this last category here of slideshow is not really anything totally new. Okay, so the last thing, or not the last thing, but the main thing that we're using these kinds of relationships for is definitions. And as you said, part of the narration, the second major part of your thesis, is the narration in which you're going to define key terms, give your audience a historical background, and explain the kairos. Why is this issue relevant? So definition is, again, a way of showing that relationships of ideas. And there are different ways to define terms, and we're going to go over a couple of these here on this slideshow. Right? And when you're defining terms, the easy way is to just go to the dictionary. What does the dictionary say? Then use that. Sometimes it's not as helpful though, depending. From experience. Sometimes a dictionary definition, especially depending on the part of speech, it can be sort of a roundabout, not very helpful kind of definition, especially even dictionaries sometimes will use the term within its own definition, which is rarely helpful, and that from experience. So sometimes there'll be some key terms that you're going to use throughout your thesis, your paper, and probably your presentation, and you're going to want your audience to know this is really important. And so you'll define them, and you can define it your own way, especially if it's sort of an ambiguous term. But if there needs a specific technical, professional definition, you should obviously use whatever resources are there that can give it a good definition. But you will need to know and define for your audience specifically your key terms, and they don't necessarily, like I said, have to be straight from the dictionary. But within reason, you can use your own definition and be consistent throughout your presentation with them. Okay, so we're gonna. Now we've got a little bit of background on arrangement and definitions. We're going to start looking at, in this next video, some different ways to create definitions, and then we'll practice that, or you'll practice that for homework either probably the second day of this week, whatever time we're getting around to this here as we start to kick off second quarter here. All right, so we'll see you next video with some specific ways of how to create definitions and how to use them. All right, we'll see you pretty soon.